Cat scratches at an old door. What's behind it will leave you shaking. The wind howled through the narrow alley, its icy fingers rattling the loose shingles of the old Victorian house at the end of the street. A pale moon cast a ghostly glow over the neighborhood, its light reflecting off a pair of gleaming green eyes. The cat, sleek, black as midnight, and unnervingly still, sat at the foot of the grand oak door. Its gaze was fixed on the tarnished brass handle, as if it could see through the wood, deep into the mysteries hidden beyond. No one lived in the house anymore. For years, it had stood empty, its windows clouded with grime, its gardens overrun with weeds. Stories of the house's cursed past were whispered in hushed tones by the locals. Children dared each other to run up the cracked stone steps, touch the door, and flee before anything, or anyone, noticed. Most didn't even make it that far. But tonight, the cat was different. Its presence wasn't accidental. Its sharp claws extended, and it began scratching at the door. Slowly at first, then with an almost frantic urgency. The sound was eerie, like nails on a chalkboard, cutting through the stillness of the night. Inside, the house seemed to awaken. A faint creak echoed from the upper floor, followed by a soft rustling, as though something had stirred after a long slumber. Shadows danced across the walls, despite the absence of light. The air grew heavy, charged with an invisible tension that seemed to spill into the street. That's when Sophie noticed the cat. She had been walking home from her late shift at the diner, her arms wrapped tightly around herself to keep out the cold. At first, she thought it was just a stray, common enough in the area. But there was something about the way it moved, the way it scratched at the door like it was demanding to be let in, that stopped her in her tracks. She hesitated at the edge of the property, her breath visible in the chill air. "Hey, kitty," she called softly, her voice trembling more from unease than the cold. "What are you doing here?" The cat paused mid-scratch and turned to look at her. Its eyes seemed to glow unnaturally bright, piercing through the darkness. For a moment, Sophie felt as though it was trying to tell her something, to pull her closer. Against her better judgment, she stepped onto the overgrown path leading to the house. The wind picked up, whipping her hair into her face and pushing against her back as if urging her forward. The cat resumed its scratching, its movements more frantic now. Sophie's heart pounded in her chest as she reached the base of the steps. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, to go home, to forget she'd ever seen the cat or the door. But she couldn't. Her hand reached for the railing, its iron cold and slick beneath her fingers. The closer she got, the more she noticed the peculiar details of the door. Deep gouges in the wood, as though something, or someone, had clawed at it before. Faded symbols, etched into the frame, hinted at rituals or warnings long forgotten. "Is there someone inside?" she whispered, the words barely audible over the howling wind. The cat let out a low, guttural growl, a sound that sent shivers down her spine. Then, without warning, it leapt onto the door, its claws raking across the surface one last time. A loud click echoed in the silence. The door creaked open, revealing a sliver of darkness so impenetrable it seemed to absorb the moonlight. Sophie froze, torn between curiosity and terror. The cat slipped inside without hesitation, disappearing into the void. For a long moment, she stood there, staring into the darkness, her mind racing. What could be in there? Why had the cat led her here? And most importantly, what would happen if she followed? Taking a deep, shaky breath, Sophie stepped forward. As she crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind her, plunging her into complete darkness. What do you think Sophie will find inside? Would you have followed the cat? Let us know in the comments and stay tuned for the rest of this chilling tale. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss what happens next. Sophie's breath caught in her throat as darkness enveloped her. The only sound was the rapid thump of her heartbeat echoing in her ears. The air inside was dense, laced with the scent of damp wood and something metallic. something she couldn't quite place. She reached out, her trembling fingers grazing the rough, uneven surface of the wall beside her. Somewhere deep within, she could hear the soft patter of the cat's paws as it moved further into the shadows. "Hello," she whispered, her voice barely a murmur. It was swallowed by the silence, lost to the void. Then, a sound, a faint, rhythmic tapping, like the ticking of a clock, but slower, more deliberate. It seemed to come from above her, from the second floor. Her eyes strained against the darkness, trying to pick out shapes in the inky blackness. The creak of a floorboard answered, shifting under unseen weight. She wasn't alone. A chill raced down her spine, goosebumps prickling her skin. The cat, now a shadowy blur, let out a low, guttural purr, almost a warning. As her vision adjusted, Sophie noticed a thin, silver line of light seeping from under a door at the end of the hallway. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat, beckoning her forward. "Don't go," a voice inside her whispered, but her legs disobeyed, carrying her step by cautious step. Each footfall sent a shiver of protest up her spine. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. She glanced down and realized the cat was now at her feet, its back arched, fur bristling. "What is it?" she asked, as if expecting a response. The cat's eyes met hers, glowing with an otherworldly intensity. Before she could blink, it darted to the door, pawing at the crack beneath it, emitting a low, desperate yowl. The noise seemed to stir something on the other side. The tapping stopped, replaced by silence so profound it pressed against Sophie's ears like cotton. Then, a different sound, a slow, deliberate dragging, as if something heavy was being moved. She swallowed hard, her throat tight with fear. "Is someone there?" Sophie's voice wavered, barely louder than a whisper. The silence deepened. The cat growled again, more insistent this time, and pressed against the door. Unable to resist, she reached for the handle, her fingers brushing the cold brass. She hesitated, remembering the rumors, the stories of those who had come too close to this house and vanished without a trace. But the cat's cries cut through her doubt. It scratched frantically, each movement more desperate than the last. Sophie twisted the handle and pushed. The door swung open with a groan, revealing a room bathed in an unnatural glow. Candles, arranged in strange ancient patterns, flickered on a large table in the center. Dust motes danced in the beams of light, casting eerie shadows that slithered across the walls. And then she saw it. An old, tattered journal lying open on the table. The pages were scrawled with handwriting so wild it looked like the author had been possessed by madness. Words jumped out at her. "The Guardian. Trapped. Release." The dragging sound returned, louder now, accompanied by a guttural growl that seemed to resonate from the very foundation of the house. Sophie backed away, her eyes darting between the journal and the door. The cat hissed, arching its back, eyes fixed on something just beyond the flickering glow. A shadow, darker than any she'd ever seen, shifted at the far end of the room. What has Sophie unleashed? And can she escape before it's too late? The shadow at the far end of the room seemed to breathe, shifting and pulsating with an unnatural rhythm. Sophie's feet refused to move, her body frozen in the magnetic pull of whatever loomed before her. The cat yowled and darted to the table, knocking over a candle that sputtered and hissed before going out. The room plunged into partial darkness, the flickering flames casting grotesque shapes on the walls. The dragging sound grew louder, closer. Sophie's heart pounded as she turned her attention back to the journal on the table. Her trembling hands flipped through the pages, scanning the frantic scribbles. Amid the chaos of words, a phrase caught her eye. The door must remain sealed. Her gaze snapped to the door she had just opened. Was she too late? Whatever had been locked away here for decades, maybe centuries, was no longer contained. The air grew heavier, charged with a dark energy that made her ears ring and her head swim. She turned to the cat, now perched on the edge of the table, its eyes wide with terror. "What do I do?" Sophie whispered, her voice cracking. The cat's gaze shifted to the journal, then back to her, as if urging her to keep reading. The shadow began to take form. A figure emerged from the darkness, its shape indistinct but menacing. Its presence was suffocating, its movements unnatural. As it advanced, Sophie's breath caught in her throat. A deep, guttural voice filled the room, not from the figure, but from everywhere at once. "Who dares disturb my slumber?" It boomed, shaking the walls. Sophie stumbled backward, clutching the journal to her chest. Her fingers grazed a loose page tucked into the back cover. Pulling it free, she scanned the scribbled notes. They described a ritual, a way to banish the entity back to its prison. But it required two things: a living witness and an offering. The cat let out a sharp hiss and leapt from the table, landing in front of Sophie as if to shield her. The shadow hesitated, as though assessing the small creature. Sophie's mind raced. Was the cat the witness? Was it the offering? No, she couldn't let that happen. "What do you want?" she shouted, her voice trembling but defiant. The entity paused, its form shifting, almost dissolving into the darkness. Then it spoke again, its voice softer but no less menacing. "Freedom. I was bound here by those who feared my power. Release me, and I will spare you." "You're lying," Sophie said, clutching the journal tighter. The cat growled low in its throat, confirming her suspicion. Whatever this thing was, it couldn't be trusted. The entity surged forward, its presence filling the room. The candle's flames flickered violently, their light barely holding back the encroaching darkness. Sophie's fingers fumbled with the journal, turning to the page with the ritual instructions. She needed to act quickly. Grabbing one of the candles, she began to trace the symbols on the floor as described in the text. The entity roared, its voice a cacophony of rage and desperation. The cat moved to stand beside her, its fur bristling as it hissed at the encroaching shadow. The final symbol completed, Sophie recited the words from the page, her voice shaky but determined. The room shook violently, the shadow writhing and shrinking as a powerful wind whipped through the space. The candles flared, their light growing blindingly bright. With a deafening roar, the entity was pulled back into the void. The oppressive energy lifted, leaving the room eerily silent. Sophie collapsed to her knees, the journal slipping from her hands. The cat rubbed against her side, its purring a comforting sound in the aftermath. As she caught her breath, Sophie looked around the room. The candles had burned out, the only light coming from the faint glow of dawn seeping through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. The journal lay open beside her, its pages blank. Whatever secrets it had held were gone, leaving only the memory of what had transpired. Sophie reached down to stroke the cat's head. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice heavy with exhaustion. The cat purred louder, its green eyes glinting with a knowing look. Together, they left the house, the door slamming shut behind them. As they stepped into the morning light, Sophie couldn't help but glance back. The house stood as still and silent as ever, but she knew its secrets now, and she would never forget the night she faced the darkness within. What would you have done in Sophie's shoes? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more chilling stories. The first rays of dawn stretched across the sky, painting the horizon in hues of pink and orange. Sophie emerged from the decrepit house with the cat by her side, her legs unsteady but driven by a sense of relief and accomplishment. The air outside was crisp, free of the oppressive weight she had felt inside. Each breath felt like a renewal, a step further away from the nightmare she'd survived. The cat trotted ahead, pausing occasionally to glance back at Sophie. Its movements were deliberate, almost purposeful, as though it was leading her away from the shadows of the past. Sophie followed, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. She couldn't shake the sensation that the cat was more than just an animal. It had been her guide, her protector, and perhaps even her savior. They reached the edge of the property, where the overgrown grass met the cracked asphalt of the street. Sophie turned to look at the house one last time. It stood in eerie silence, its broken windows and sagging roof bathed in the soft light of morning. The door she had pried open now seemed firmly shut, as if the house itself had decided to bury its secrets once more. "Good riddance," she muttered under her breath. The cat let out a soft meow, as if in agreement. As Sophie began walking home, she replayed the events of the night in her mind. The entity's voice still echoed faintly in her ears, its sinister promise of freedom a chilling reminder of what could have been unleashed. But she had stood her ground, defied the darkness, and emerged victorious. Her hand still trembled slightly, a testament to the fear she had faced and conquered. When she reached her small, cozy apartment, the cat darted inside as though it had always belonged there. Sophie hesitated in the doorway, taking a moment to appreciate the warmth and safety of her home. She closed the door behind her, leaning against it with a sigh of relief. For the first time in hours, she felt truly safe. The cat jumped onto the couch, curling up as though it had been there 1,000 times before. Sophie couldn't help but smile. "I guess you're staying, huh?" she said, scratching behind its ears. The cat purred contentedly, its green eyes watching her with an intensity that made her wonder just how much it understood. Over the next few days, Sophie tried to return to normal life, but the events of that night lingered in her thoughts. She found herself drawn to the journal, now blank, as though it were waiting for her to fill its pages with her own story. With pen in hand, she began to write, detailing every moment, every emotion, and every revelation. It was a way to process what had happened, but also a way to ensure the truth wouldn't be forgotten. Word of her experience spread among her friends and neighbors, though Sophie chose to share only fragments of the story. Some dismissed it as a wild imagination, while others listened with wide eyes and hushed voices. The cat, now a permanent fixture in her life, became a symbol of the courage and loyalty that had carried her through that harrowing night. One evening, as Sophie sat on the couch with the cat curled in her lap, she looked out the window at the stars. "We did it," she said softly, her voice tinged with both pride and gratitude. The cat purred in response, its green eyes glinting like tiny emeralds in the dim light. Sophie knew she would never fully understand what had happened in that house, or why the cat had chosen to stay by her side, but she had learned something invaluable. Courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to face it head-on. And in the darkest moments, even the smallest allies can make the greatest difference. As the days turned to weeks, Sophie and the cat settled into a new rhythm. The house remained untouched, its secrets buried deep within its crumbling walls. But Sophie carried a piece of that night with her, a reminder that, no matter how dark the shadows, the light of dawn would always come. What do you think the cat's true purpose was? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more chilling and inspiring stories.